timetable for your project. One thing a publisher can really help is reduce the timetable if that's a factor, like you're trying to beat another product that's similar to yours that you're worried about to market. They can really help you with that. And the other thing, or the last thing I would say is really take into account like what you want to spend your time doing. There's some people that are really passionate about some of these things that are publishing-ish around their project, like managing their community and things like that. And there's other people who just want to make a game and they don't want to deal with all the rest of the nonsense. So you really want to think about what you want to spend time on.
Yeah, no, that's really important because like when it comes to making a game, you're already so focused on, the development and stuff. And like you kind of said, depending on your resources, your team and everything else, really knowing what you want to be spending your time doing and what's going to be most effective and probably what you're best at is really helpful to be mindful of. Because and there's nothing fun about it too, is even if you have the resources or people that can like have multiple hats, if someone hates doing community management and that's the only person who's going to be able to do the job, maybe that's might not be the best thing because if they hate doing it.
Absolutely. Yeah. It shows.
Yeah. And that's to be said with like any activity, really, right? Like if you have someone who isn't really good at it or really hates doing it, well, you probably don't want to give that person that job.
Exactly.
Cool. So in terms of doing things, though, like what other types of things like should indie devs do if they decide to go the self-publishing route?
Okay. So one of the things that you're going to want to do is be really deliberate about the discovery of your game. So you need to think about you reaching your audience. So if you just throw a game up on Steam, which is really easy to do, but you don't do anything related to telling people about it, like it will disappear in a flash and nobody will hear of it and it will fail, even if it's awesome.
Right.
So that's one of the things, that's one of the things a publisher can help with. And I feel like is one of the main things to think about these days is how to get your game discovered. And that might be something that they could help with. But if you're going to be doing it yourself, you just want to come up with plans and ideas for what to do there. And you don't have to necessarily just do traditional ad buys and traditional marketing. That's not what I mean. There's other ways to go about it. You just want to have some plans around, like, am I going to use some influencers, or I'm like, exactly what am I going to do to get people to discover my game, or maybe I'm going to use social media in a creative, unique way.
So I have a quick question about that. Has there been any, and if you don't know any off the top of your head, that's fine too. Has there been any examples of, and regardless if they self-published or not, of people doing things that really stood out and were really creative and not necessarily going through conventional means, like you said, like traditional buys? Like, was there anything creative that someone did to stand out, whether it was a post on Twitter or somewhere else? Anything that comes to mind?
I don't have like a specific example of like this thing was a flash fire of this particular thing, but I've seen some developers that really, they took some time to foster a community. Here's an example, I guess. Like if you have a game that's conducive to speedrunning, like I met some guys who actually took their game demo to a speedrunning convention,
okay,
and had guys try it out, and then got the word out to the speedrunning community that here's this game that's coming, that's really conducive to speedruns, and they grew their audience pretty significantly during that little event. Okay. So they were just thinking about, this is the kind of game we made. These are the kind of users who might like it. And it's not meant to be just a speedrun game, but it lent itself to that audience. So they went and capitalized on that audience at one of their events. So it's that sort of thing. It's thinking, like, think outside the box.
Yeah,
about how you could reach people.
Yeah, when you were talking about that too, there's another person that I was talking to a while ago. And they had this game, which I believe the game's called Under, and one of the things that they did was kind of a similar approach where they were thinking outside the box and be like, well, where can we post this on Twitter, right? And so obviously there's indie games and certain areas like that, but what they decided to do was, and I forget the title of the subreddit, but it basically had to deal with being afraid of like drowning or underwater or whatever that phobia is called. And they posted it there, and it did remarkably well because a lot of the game is about a ship that's sinking. And so, but it was totally not necessarily in a directly game-related crowd, but think of like the audience in terms of who's on Reddit. Are Redditors, do they play games? Well, there could probably be a good number of them did, and they just got an enormously well-received response from making a post about a phobia. So that was pretty interesting to see that. And again, it goes to your example too, like those guys thinking outside of the box, going to a convention that has nothing to do with games, but is tailored to a community in which the game is kind of around or about. So really like that. Yeah. So what other? So that was like one, and you mentioned too about like fostering and growing a community too as another thing to consider if going the self-publishing route. Could you maybe go a little bit more in detail about that?
So it is very true that like, and we're looking at a lot of projects now, and we're tracking where they were at like before they launched, and then their success afterwards, and. A trend that we are definitely seeing are games that have built up a community in social media and other places, and you build your wish lists on Steam. Like those products do way better after launch. Like Hype Train is a real thing, and if you can do that and you can engage with your fans before you launch, like some people think about, I'm going to launch and then I'm going to have a community and I'm going to manage it because I'm live. But that's not the way to think about it. You really want to think about reaching those people while you're in development. I think that the developers, the indie devs who do it best, are very early sharing some art, getting some people engaged with their title and excited for when it's going to come out and talking about it. And I've seen some do a great job of that. Others don't do that as much, and then they have a harder time trying to ramp up that hype train in a short period of time once they sign with the publisher or once they launch, and then it's almost too late. So it's something you really want to think about, whether it's you, or especially if it's you and you're not using a publisher. You really want to be intentional about engaging with those folks, whether it's on Twitter or if you have a forum, or you mentioned Reddit. Reddit's a good place. A lot of indie gamers are on Reddit and talking to each other. So just get some of your work out there, get some people interested in it and talking about it. And it'll help you immensely when it comes to launch day.
Cool. And another thing I want to know about too is like how important is like, let's say, having a certain kind of vision. For example, like a lot of times when people are launching a game or in the process, they're really focused on like maybe their native language or things like that. How important is it to maybe think potentially beyond that, like expanding their reach in the global market?
Yeah, I think for sure one of the things as an indie dev who's trying to self-publish, you definitely want to think globally. It's a difficult thing to do, and even some publishers have a hard time. Like it's one of the challenges for me in my office, being a branch office for a Korean-based company. We have a lot of cultural differences with Korea that we have to work through. So understanding different cultures in different regions and everything is super important. One of the simple things you can do is to prepare your code, for different languages. Like you can make it much easier to localize, even if you don't have the money to localize right now. You can prep your code so that when it comes time to, you can very easily add different languages to your game. So you want to be thinking about how to do that. You might want to think about fonts and which fonts are you going to use, and are they global? Can they be used in different languages like Korean, Chinese? Sometimes you can't use the font that you use for English, and you just want to be really intentional about being ready to go to the different markets. They might not all be for you, and you might not want to go there. That's sort of homework for you to do on where you think your game is going to do well. But you want to be thinking about it because it's a great opportunity to get your game much further than it will be just in your native language, in your native territory.
Cool.
So you definitely want to think about it.
Yeah, no, definitely, and all that makes sense. And I think even down to some of those details as the fonts is very valid point. Like those are the type of things that you're not necessarily thinking about or not being too concerned with, but at least if you're aware and mindful of those things, it will make that process down the road easier.
Yeah, I've been on big projects that have gone through painful font changes because the globalization, like, it wasn't going to work. And we decided to change fonts entirely in order to make things work so that it would function in all the territories we want it to be in. So yeah, it's an important thing.
Because that can definitely be a tedious process, and time and everything else. Like it could couldn't it potentially be a bottleneck in some cases too?
Yeah. No, I mean, you don't want, if you thought about it, it means like you're ready for when that happens. If
Right.
you didn't think about it and you're like, oh, like with the current font, even if it's available in that language, now my text boxes don't work with it.
Yep.
It doesn't, I need to change it. And then I have to figure out how to support 2 fonts instead of 1 font for different territories. Like, but if you thought through it all and you're ready, great.
See, there's a lot of time, frustration, and probably other things. All right, cool. Well, I kind of want to shift things a bit because we were definitely talking a good amount about self-publishing, but like, for those people who have thought through the process, or like, all right, you know what, a publisher is for me based off of whatever my reasonings are. But when they made that decision, what types of things should people look for in a publisher? Because there's a lot of publishers out there. So what should indie devs focus on most when they're considering partnering with one?
So, like, it's a sucky answer, but it really depends on circumstances for you as the indie dev. So if you think about some of the questions that we talked about earlier, consider what your project needs, and then what stage of development are you in? So, like, different publishers will offer different things. Like, some may just want to pour money into you, but they don't have all the services that we were just talking about, like localization and those sorts of things. Mm-hmm. Others will have all of that. Some of them are going to be good at marketing, and maybe they're good at console marketing, but they're not good at mobile marketing. So you're going to want to find a publisher that is kind of good at the thing that you think your project needs. And then also the development stage matters. Like, I mean, for example, NeoWiz, we tend to look for projects that are late stage development. We're a little bit lower risk, more conservative in our investments. But there's some publishers that are looking for big risk, big reward type projects, and they want to fund a lot of development because they want that big payout if they're on track and they find the right gem. So you want to do some research in terms of, like, matching yourself with these different publishers. Like, if you're early stage and you need that development money and you want that support very early on, like, look for those guys that are looking for big risk, big reward, but if you're just getting over the hump and you just want help with the services and getting out the door, you could find some publishers that are good at that part of it. So I would say, like, find someone who's in the right stage of development for you and can meet the sort of perceived needs of your team.
Yeah. And like you said, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier in this discussion, is just, really identifying what your needs are, and probably spend a good amount of time thinking that through, because there could be some aspects of it that you might not even consider. I know one that a lot of people don't think of because they're like, oh, I couldn't see this, is merchandising. I mean, not that should be like the main focal point or important thing, but it could be another opportunity way. And some people will, I would assume some publishers do nothing with that. Others might. But that's just one example of probably numerous things that you might not consider, with your game. And again, it comes back to, like, thinking outside of the box and that type of stuff.
Yeah, no, it's all about, like, what you want to do and what they can do for you. And, I think it's important to think about all the factors. Like, some folks come into it of just like, I need to get this dollar amount.
Yeah.
And I think that's the wrong focus, because the best money won't necessarily be the best partner for you. You want to think about all the other factors and how they can help you in other ways that might be unique to your team.
Yeah. I love how you're approaching it with the mindset of like really with the team in place, because basically what you're saying is like you want to find a way to play to everybody's strengths, because then that's just going to set you up for a success to win, and obviously for the publisher too. Like